In the year 2147, Earth had transformed into a hub of interstellar learning. Galaxia Academy, humanity's first intergalactic university, stood as a shining beacon of progress and unity. Nestled in the heart of New Geneva, a sprawling metropolis where skyscrapers pierced the clouds and hovercrafts zipped through the air, the Academy welcomed students from across the galaxy. Beings of all shapes, sizes, and species walked its halls, exchanging ideas, languages, and cultures. It was a place where dreams were born and futures forged. Leela Carter sat at the back of Lecture Hall Omega-3, nervously tapping her stylus against her datapad. Her dark hair was tied into a messy bun, and her wide brown eyes darted between the glowing equations on the holographic board and the alien professor pacing in front of the class. Professor 609 was unlike anyone or anything she had ever encountered before. His shimmering bioluminescent skin shifted colors with every movement, casting faint hues of blue, green, and purple onto the walls. 6 sinuous tentacles flowed gracefully behind him like an ethereal cape, each one holding tools or adjusting controls without hesitation. Today's lecture focused on quantum astrophysics, a subject that made Leela's head spin faster than the rotating black hole simulation hovering above their heads. She tried to concentrate, scribbling notes furiously, but the numbers blurred together on her screen. How could she possibly grasp something so complex when she barely understood the basics? The other students around her seemed unfazed. A tall, insectoid being to her left clicked its mandibles rhythmically, nodding along with the professor's words. Across the aisle, a gelatinous creature floated silently, absorbing information directly through osmosis. Even Kale, a quiet water-based student whose translucent body shimmered under the room's artificial light, looked completely engrossed. Everyone here belonged, except for Lila, or at least, that's how it felt. When the lecture ended, Leela lingered, watching as the rest of the class filed out. Some chatted animatedly about wormhole trajectories. Others headed straight for the cafeteria, eager to grab a bite of nutrient-rich algae bars or plasma-infused beverages. But Leela stayed rooted to her seat, staring blankly at the now empty equation floating above the podium. Her midterm results had been posted earlier that morning, and they weren't good. Not good at all. She sighed heavily, slumping forward until her forehead rested against the cool metal desk. This wasn't supposed to happen. Back home in Chicago Prime, she'd always been top of her class. People called her the future of engineering. But here, among geniuses and prodigies from across the stars, she felt like nothing more than an imposter. "Miss Carter," came a soft, melodic voice. Startled, Leela looked up to see Professor Zixer standing nearby. His large, multifaceted eyes gleamed softly, reflecting shards of light like a kaleidoscope. Despite his intimidating appearance, there was something calming about him, an aura of wisdom and patience that put her slightly at ease. "Yes, Professor," she replied, trying to mask her nervousness. "I notice you've been struggling," he said gently. His tentacles swayed slightly, emphasizing his words. "Quantum astrophysics is no easy field, even for those who have studied it for centuries." Leela winced. Struggling was an understatement. Failing was more accurate. I'm sorry, sir. I thought I could keep up, but it's just so much harder than I expected." Professor Zixer tilted his head, considering her carefully. "Failure is not the end, Miss Carter. It is merely a stepping stone. Would you like my help?" Her heart leaped with hope. Tutoring sessions with the professor himself. That could make all the difference. "Yes, please," she exclaimed. "I'll do whatever it takes to pass." A ripple of color passed over his skin, perhaps amusement, or maybe approval. "Very well," he said. "But understand this, my assistance comes with a condition." "A condition?" Leela blinked, confused. What kind of condition could he possibly have? Professor Zixer extended one of his tentacles, pointing toward the glowing orb still hovering near the ceiling. "You must prove to me that you understand not only the equations but also empathy. True understanding requires both intellect and compassion, Miss Carter. Are you willing to meet that challenge? For a moment, Leela hesitated. Empathy. What did emotions have to do with physics? But then she remembered why she wanted to become an engineer in the first place, to build bridges, solve problems, and help people. Maybe this strange requirement wasn't so unrelated after all. I'll try, she said finally, determination creeping into her voice. Whatever it takes. Good, Professor Zixer replied, his glow brightening slightly. We begin tomorrow evening, in my lab. Be prepared. As he turned and glided away, Leela couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to embark on something far bigger and stranger than she'd ever imagined. Whatever lay ahead, one thing was certain. Failure was no longer an option. The next evening, Leela found herself standing outside Professor Zixer's lab, clutching her datapad tightly. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a room unlike anything she'd ever seen before. It wasn't just a laboratory. It was an entire world contained within four walls. Floating holograms of swirling galaxies and pulsating stars filled the air, casting shifting patterns of light across every surface. Strange plants with glowing leaves lined the edges of the room, their tendrils swaying gently as if alive. Devices hummed softly in the background, some emitting faint musical tones that seemed to harmonize with each other. At the center of it all stood Professor Zixer, his tentacles weaving intricate patterns as he adjusted settings on a console. He turned toward Leela, his multifaceted eyes gleaming warmly. "Welcome, Miss Carter," he said, his melodic voice filling the space. "Are you ready to begin?" Leela nodded, though her stomach churned with nervous excitement. "Yes, Professor." "Good." He gestured for her to follow him deeper into the lab. As they walked, Leila noticed something peculiar, a small, translucent orb hovering near the ceiling. It pulsed rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat. She wanted to ask about it, but decided against interrupting. They stopped at a circular table surrounded by floating screens displaying complex equations and diagrams. Professor Zixer reached out with one of his tentacles and tapped a control panel. Instantly, the screens shifted, showing not formulas, but images of bizarre creatures. Some looked vaguely familiar, while others were completely alien. Beings made of liquid metal, creatures with crystalline exoskeletons, and even entities that appeared to be pure energy. "This is your first task," Zixer explained, pointing to one of the screens. On it was a glowing blob-like organism, its surface rippling with colors that changed unpredictably. "Introduce yourself to this being." Leela blinked, confused. "Introduce myself? But how? I don't even know what it is." "That is precisely the point," Zixer replied calmly. "It cannot understand spoken language any more than you can understand its natural form of communication. You must find another way to connect." Her mind raced. How could she possibly communicate with something so foreign? She glanced at the professor, hoping for guidance, but he simply watched her expectantly. Taking a deep breath, Lila stepped closer to the screen. The blob responded immediately, its colors flashing rapidly, almost as if it sensed her presence. She tried waving her hand slowly, mimicking its movements. At first, nothing happened. Then, after several tense moments, the blob's colors began to shift more deliberately, matching the pace of her gestures. Encouraged, Leela smiled and continued experimenting, using different motions and expressions. After a while, she realized the blob wasn't just reacting, it was responding. Each movement she made elicited a unique reaction, as though they were having a silent conversation. When she finally stepped back, exhausted but exhilarated, Zixer nodded approvingly. "Well done, Miss Carter. You've taken the first step toward understanding empathy, not through words, but through action and observation." But the challenges didn't end there. Over the next few days, Zixer assigned her increasingly unconventional tasks. One day, she was asked to solve a simulated crisis involving a malfunctioning spaceship stranded in deep space. Instead of focusing solely on technical fixes, she had to prioritize the safety and well-being of the crew members, who came from vastly different species with conflicting needs. Another time, she worked with a team of AI drones programmed to mimic emotions, learning how to interpret their nonverbal cues and adapt her strategies accordingly. Each assignment pushed Leela far beyond her comfort zone. There were times when frustration bubbled over, especially when solutions eluded her or when she felt overwhelmed by the complexity of the problems. Yet, slowly but surely, she began to notice subtle changes in herself. She started seeing connections where none seemed apparent before. Patterns emerged not just in numbers and equations, but in behaviors and relationships. Problems weren't isolated puzzles anymore. They were living, breathing challenges that affected real beings. Despite her growing confidence, doubts lingered. Why was Zixer putting her through these tests instead of teaching her traditional physics? Wasn't passing the final exam supposed to be about mastering quantum mechanics, not deciphering alien body language? One afternoon, as she sat alone in the lab reviewing notes from her latest simulation, Kale entered quietly. The water-based student moved gracefully, his translucent body shimmering under the ambient light. "You look troubled," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Leela sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I just don't get it, Kale. All these weird assignments. He's not even teaching me actual physics." Kale tilted his head thoughtfully. "Maybe that's the point. Have you ever wondered why he calls it empathy?" "I guess." Leela hesitated. "But how does that help me pass my exam?" Instead of answering directly, Kale gestured toward one of the glowing plants nearby. Its leaves shimmered brightly, responding to their presence. "Do you see how it reacts to us? Every living thing has its own rhythm, its own way of existing. Understanding those rhythms isn't just about solving problems. It's about coexisting with them. Maybe Professor Zixer wants you to learn that balance." His words stayed with Leela long after he left. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she replayed everything she'd experienced in the lab. Slowly, pieces began falling into place. Empathy wasn't just about emotions. It was about connection, about finding common ground, no matter how different two things might seem. The realization hit her like a bolt of lightning. Maybe Zixer's methods weren't distractions at all. Maybe they were preparing her for something much bigger than a simple test. Lila's question hung in the air, echoing softly against the hum of the lab's glowing devices. Professor Zixer hesitated, his tentacles curling slightly as if weighing how much to reveal. For a moment, the room seemed quieter than usual, the faint music from the alien plants fading into silence. Then, with a deep sigh, or what Leela interpreted as one, Zixer gestured toward the holographic map still hovering above the table. "This," he began, his melodic voice tinged with sadness, "is the story of my people, and it is also why I teach." Leela leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. She had always assumed Zixer was simply an eccentric academic, passionate about pushing students beyond their limits. But now, seeing the weight in his expression and the way his bioluminescent skin dimmed slightly, she realized there was far more to him than met the eye. "Long ago," Zixer continued, "my species thrived on a planet called HFY. We were advanced, brilliant even, masters of technology, science, and art. Our cities stretched across continents, powered by energy harvested from stars themselves. To outsiders, we appeared invincible." He paused, extending a tentacle to adjust the hologram. The image shifted, zooming in on a vibrant blue-green whirl surrounded by rings of shimmering light. It looked breathtakingly beautiful, like a jewel adrift in space. But then, slowly, cracks began to form on its surface. Rivers dried up, forests turned gray, and entire cities crumbled into dust. "What happened?" Leela whispered, unable to tear her eyes away. Zixer's glow flickered faintly, as though the memory pained him. "We became blinded by our own achievements. Greed and arrogance consumed us. Wars erupted over resources, ideologies clashed, and trust between nations dissolved. Knowledge became a weapon rather than a tool for progress. In the end, Our brilliance destroyed us. The hologram faded, leaving only darkness above the table. Leela felt a chill run down her spine. The vision reminded her eerily of Earth's history. The countless conflicts and environmental disasters humanity had barely survived. Were all civilizations doomed to repeat the same mistakes? What? She stammered, searching for words. How does this relate to me? To your lessons? Zixer's gaze softened. Because you are part of the next generation, the ones who will shape the future of not just Earth, but the galaxy. If we do not learn from the past, we are destined to repeat it. That is why I test for empathy as well as intellect. Understanding others, not just their languages or technologies, but their hearts, is the key to preventing such tragedies. Leela sat quietly, absorbing his words. She thought back to the strange assignments he'd given her. Communicating with the plasma blob, solving crises aboard simulated spaceships, working alongside Kale and the AI drones. Each task had pushed her to think beyond herself, to consider perspectives vastly different from her own. Was that what Zixer meant by empathy? Not just feeling compassion, but actively seeking connection and understanding. I didn't realize, she admitted finally. I thought you were just being difficult. A ripple of color passed over Zixer's skin. A sign of amusement, perhaps. Difficult, yes, but never without purpose. You have shown promise, Miss Carter. Promise that gives me hope. His praise warmed her, but it also deepened her resolve. If Zixer believed in her potential, then she owed it to him, and to herself, to keep trying, no matter how challenging the road ahead might be. Over the following days, Leela threw herself into her work with renewed determination. Her sessions with Zixer grew more intense, each assignment testing not only her problem-solving skills, but also her ability to adapt and collaborate. One evening, she found herself paired with Kale again, this time tasked with repairing a damaged ecosystem inside a sealed dome. The environment was delicate, teetering on the brink of collapse due to imbalances caused by invasive plant-like organisms. At first, Leela approached the problem methodically, analyzing data and calculating solutions based on scientific principles. But when her initial attempts failed to stabilize the system, frustration bubbled over. Why isn't this working? She muttered, glaring at the readings on her datapad. Kale floated closer, his shimmering form reflecting the soft glow of the dome's artificial sun. Maybe we're missing something, he suggested gently. Have you considered how these plants interact with each other? They might not respond well to abrupt changes. His words struck a chord. Lila remembered Zixer's emphasis on empathy, not forcing solutions, but listening to the needs of living systems. Taking a step back, she observed the plants more closely. Their movements were subtle, almost imperceptible, but they revealed patterns of behavior. Some thrived in clusters, while others needed space to grow. By adjusting their placement and introducing gentle stimuli instead of drastic interventions, Leela and Kale managed to restore balance. As the last of the invasive plants receded, leaving behind a thriving habitat, Leela felt a surge of pride. More importantly, she understood what Zixer had been trying to teach her all along. True intelligence wasn't about imposing control, it was about fostering harmony. Despite her growing confidence, Leela couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something Zixer wasn't telling her. Late one night, after another grueling session, she lingered in the lab, scrolling through notes on her datapad. Her eyes fell on the small, glowing orb suspended near the ceiling, the same one she'd noticed during her first visit. It pulsed rhythmically, almost hypnotically, drawing her attention. Curiosity getting the better of her, Leela stood and approached it cautiously. As she reached out, her fingers brushing against its smooth surface, a sudden surge of energy coursed through her. Images flooded her mind, a devastated planet, skies choked with ash, and beings fleeing in terror. She saw flashes of Zixer, younger and unscarred, leading desperate efforts to save his people. And then, just as quickly as it began, the vision ended, leaving her breathless and shaken. What did you see? Zixer's voice startled her. He stood nearby, his tentacles coiled tightly, betraying his unease. "The orb, it showed me your world," Layla replied, her voice trembling. "Sithera 7. It's gone, isn't it?" Zixer nodded solemnly. "Yes. All that remains are memories and lessons. I placed that artifact here as a reminder of what happens when knowledge is wielded without care. I hope you would discover it eventually." Leela stared at him, realization dawning. "That's why you've been teaching me this way. You're not just preparing me for an exam. You're preparing me for the universe." For the first time, Zixer's glow brightened fully, a radiant display of approval. "Exactly, Miss Carter. The final challenge awaits you soon. When it comes, remember this: saving what cannot speak requires both wisdom and heart." With those cryptic words, he dismissed her for the night. As Leela left the lab, her mind raced with questions. What was the final challenge? And how could she possibly prepare for it? One thing was certain: whatever lay ahead, she would face it not just as a student, but as someone ready to make a difference. The days leading up to the final challenge were a blur of preparation and introspection for Leela. She spent hours in the lab, reviewing notes from her previous assignments and practicing techniques she'd learned under Professor Zixer's guidance. Yet, despite her efforts, uncertainty gnawed at her. What exactly did Zixer mean by saving what cannot speak? How could she possibly prepare for something so vague? One evening, as she sat alone in the library, a vast, domed chamber filled with floating archives and holographic books, Kale appeared beside her. His translucent form shimmered faintly in the dim light, giving him an almost ethereal presence. "You look troubled," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the quiet hum of the library systems. Leela sighed, closing the datapad she'd been studying. "I can't stop thinking about what Professor Zixer showed me. The orb, his planet, everything. I feel like there's more to this final challenge than he's letting on." Kale tilted his head thoughtfully. "Maybe you're right. But sometimes the best way to prepare is not to focus on the unknown. It's to trust what you've already learned." His words struck a chord. Over the past weeks, Kale had become more than just a classmate. He was someone who understood her struggles and shared her determination. Together, they had tackled some of Zixer's toughest assignments, learning from each other along the way. Perhaps now, facing the biggest test yet, their partnership could be the key to success. "Do you think we should try decoding his lessons?" Leela asked suddenly, an idea forming in her mind. "Maybe there's a pattern or clue hidden somewhere." Kale nodded enthusiastically. "It's worth a shot. Where do we start?" They began by revisiting every assignment Zixer had given them, searching for connections that might reveal the nature of the final challenge. In the glowing leaves of the alien plants, they found subtle messages encoded in light patterns. Within the simulated crisis, they noticed recurring themes of balance and cooperation. Even the plasma blob's behavior hinted at underlying principles of communication and adaptation. As they pieced together these fragments, a larger picture emerged. Each task had been designed not only to teach specific skills, but also to instill broader values: patience, empathy, teamwork, and resilience. Slowly, Leela realized that Zixer wasn't testing her ability to solve problems. He was testing her ability to care. But their breakthrough came unexpectedly late one night while working in the lab. Leela accidentally activated a hidden compartment in one of Zixer's consoles, a small drawer containing a series of cryptic symbols etched onto a metallic plate. The markings pulsed faintly, as if alive. "What is this?" Kale murmured, examining the artifact closely. Leela frowned, tracing the symbols with her finger. They looked familiar, though she couldn't place why. Then it hit her. They matched the patterns she'd seen in the glowing orb. Her heart raced as she pulled up her datapad and cross-referenced the symbols with notes from earlier assignments. After several tense minutes, the screen displayed a single phrase: "To pass, you must save what cannot speak." "That's it," Leela exclaimed, turning to Kale. "This has to be the clue to the final challenge." Cal's expression turned serious. If that's true, then whatever we'll face won't just require technical knowledge. It'll demand understanding of others, of ourselves, and maybe even of life itself. Determined to uncover more, they decided to decode the rest of the message. Working together, they translated additional lines. Listen without ears. Act without force. Heal without hands. Each line seemed to reinforce the importance of empathy and intuition over brute logic. By dawn, they had pieced together enough to form a theory. The final challenge would involve restoring balance to a complex system, much like the ecosystem simulation they'd worked on before, but on a much grander scale. When Leela arrived at the lab the next morning, she felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. Professor Zixer greeted her warmly, his tentacles swaying rhythmically as always. "You seem prepared, Miss Carter," he observed, his multifaceted eyes gleaming with approval. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, glancing at Cal, who stood nearby. Though Zixer hadn't explicitly mentioned allies, she hoped her friend's presence wouldn't be considered cheating. Zixer gestured toward a sealed door at the far end of the lab. "Your final challenge awaits beyond that threshold. Remember, knowledge is powerful, but compassion is transformative. Trust yourself and those who stand with you." With a deep breath, Lila stepped forward, Cal close behind. The door slid open, revealing a breathtaking sight. A miniature universe contained within a massive transparent dome. Inside, galaxies swirled, stars twinkled, and planets orbited in perfect harmony. At its center floated a fragile ecosystem, a microcosm of interconnected life forms teetering on the edge of collapse. "This is incredible," Leela whispered, awestruck. Cale nodded silently, his shimmering body reflecting the vibrant colors of the artificial. She walked over to the glowing orb suspended near the ceiling, the artifact that had shown her glimpses of Zixer's past. Reaching out cautiously, she touched its smooth surface again. This time, instead of visions of destruction, she saw flashes of hope. Planets healing, species coexisting, and stars shining brighter than ever. It was as though the orb carried not just memories of loss, but also dreams of renewal. "Do you see it?" Zixer's voice startled her. She hadn't noticed him standing nearby. "Yes," she replied, turning to face him. "It's beautiful. Is this what you see when you look at the future?" Zixer's tentacles curled slightly, a gesture Leela had come to recognize as contemplation. "Perhaps, or perhaps it is what you will help create. The future is not written. It is shaped by those who dare to dream and act with purpose." His words resonated deeply within her. For so long, Leela had doubted herself, fearing she wasn't smart enough or strong enough to make a difference. But now, surrounded by the evidence of her hard work and guided by Zixer's wisdom, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Certainty. Certainty that she could contribute, that she could be part of something greater. "I want to keep learning," she said firmly. "Not just about science, but about how to make a real impact. How to help others understand these lessons too." Zixer's glow dimmed slightly, as though touched by her sincerity. "Then consider this the beginning of your journey, not the end. There is much more to explore, both within yourself and beyond these walls." Over the next few days, Leela threw herself into preparing for graduation. The academy buzzed with excitement as students completed their final projects and attended celebratory gatherings. In the cafeteria, debates raged about interstellar diplomacy, quantum engineering, and the ethics of terraforming. Everywhere she went, Leela saw reminders of the incredible diversity and potential of the galaxy. Yet, amidst the chaos, she found moments of quiet reflection. One afternoon, while walking through the Academy's botanical gardens, a sprawling expanse of alien flora bathed in artificial sunlight, she encountered Cal once more. He drifted silently among the plants, his presence almost blending with the environment. "How are you feeling?" he asked, noticing her approach. "Nervous," she admitted with a small laugh. but also hopeful, like I'm ready for whatever comes next. Kale smiled, his shimmering form catching the light. You've earned that feeling. And remember, you're not alone. We'll face the challenges together. Leela nodded, grateful for his friendship. Together, they wandered deeper into the garden, marveling at the strange beauty around them. A flower-like organism unfolded its petals, releasing a cascade of glowing spores. Nearby, a vine-like plant hummed softly, responding to their movements. As they stood there, surrounded by life in all its forms, Leela realized something profound. The lessons she'd learned weren't confined to classrooms or labs. They were woven into the fabric of existence itself. Empathy, balance, and connection weren't just tools for passing exams. They were keys to navigating the vast, intricate web of the universe. On the eve of graduation, Leela returned to the lab one last time. Zixer awaited her, holding the glowing orb in one of his tentacles. He extended it toward her, his expression unreadable yet somehow comforting. "This belongs to you now," he said simply. "Carry it as a reminder of what you've achieved and what lies ahead." Tears welled in Leela's eyes as she accepted the artifact. Its warmth radiated through her fingers, filling her with a sense of purpose. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Zixer's glow brightened momentarily, a silent acknowledgement of her gratitude. Then, without another word, he turned and glided away, leaving her alone with her thoughts. As she held the orb close, Leela knew this wasn't the end of her story. It was merely the prologue. Tomorrow, she would step onto a new path, carrying with her the lessons of empathy, resilience, and hope. And somewhere out there, among the stars, Professor Zixer watched with quiet pride, knowing he had helped shape a brighter future. The morning of graduation dawned bright and clear, with the sun casting golden rays over New Geneva. The city buzzed with energy as hovercrafts zipped through the skies, their sleek forms reflecting the light like shards of glass. At Galaxia Academy, students bustled about in preparation for the ceremony, their excitement palpable. For most, it was a day of celebration, a culmination of years of hard work and dedication. But for Layla Carter, it felt like something more. It was a moment of transformation, a threshold between who she had been and who she was becoming. She stood before the mirror in her dorm room, adjusting the collar of her formal uniform. The garment shimmered faintly, its fabric embedded with tiny threads that glowed softly when exposed to light. It was designed to symbolize unity among species, a reminder that no matter how different beings might appear, they shared the same universe. As she gazed at her reflection, Leela couldn't help but marvel at how far she'd come. Just months ago, she'd been a struggling student doubting her place at the academy. Now she was ready to step into the unknown, armed with knowledge, empathy, and purpose. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Opening it, she found Kale waiting outside. His translucent body shimmered brightly, almost as if he were glowing with anticipation. "Ready?" he asked, his voice gentle. "As I'll ever be," Leela replied with a nervous smile. Together, they made their way to the grand auditorium, where the graduation ceremony would take place. The hall was a marvel of engineering, its ceiling an expansive dome displaying a live projection of the galaxy above. Stars twinkled, nebulae swirled, and distant planets drifted lazily across the simulated sky. Rows of seats stretched out before the stage, filled with students, faculty members, and proud families from across the stars. Leela took her seat near the front, clutching the glowing orb Zixer had given her tightly. Its warmth reassured her, grounding her amidst the whirlwind of emotions whirling inside. She glanced around, taking in the diversity of the crowd. Beings of all shapes, sizes, and colors sat side by side, united by the shared experience of learning and growth. Despite their differences, there was a sense of camaraderie in the air, a collective acknowledgement that they were part of something greater than themselves. When the ceremony began, the Chancellor of Galaxia Academy stepped onto the stage. Her voice resonated through the hall as she welcomed everyone and spoke of the challenges and opportunities awaiting the graduates. You are not just individuals, she declared, her words echoing powerfully. You are ambassadors of hope, tasked with shaping the future of our galaxy. Carry with you the lessons you've learned here, and never forget the responsibility that comes with knowledge. As the speeches continued, Lila's mind wandered back to her time at the academy. The struggles, the breakthroughs, and the moments of clarity. She thought of Professor Zixer, whose unconventional methods had pushed her beyond her limits. She remembered the plasma blob, the simulated crisis, and the fragile ecosystem in the dome. Each challenge had taught her something invaluable, not just about science, but about life itself. Finally, it was time for the presentation of diplomas. One by one, students walked up to the stage to receive their certificates, accompanied by applause and cheers from the audience. When Lila's name was called, she rose from her seat, her heart pounding. Walking toward the stage, she felt a mixture of pride and humility. This wasn't just her achievement. It belonged to everyone who had supported her along the way. As she accepted her diploma, she caught sight of Zixer sitting quietly in the front row. His tentacles swayed slightly, and his glow pulsed warmly, signaling approval. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment, Lila understood the weight of what he had given her. It wasn't just an education. It was a mission, a call to action. Returning to her seat, she listened intently as the final speaker addressed the graduates. "Remember," the speaker said, his voice steady and earnest, "the universe is vast and full of mysteries, but it is also fragile. Your task is not only to explore but to protect, to ensure that progress benefits all, not just a few." His words struck a chord deep within Lila. She thought of Earth, her home planet, and the countless worlds she hoped to visit someday. Each one was a tapestry of life, interconnected and interdependent. If humanity, and indeed all intelligent species, were to thrive, they needed leaders who understood this truth. Leaders like her. After the ceremony, the graduates spilled out into the courtyard, laughing and embracing one another. Families gathered to congratulate their loved ones, while friends exchanged promises to stay in touch. Amidst the chaos, Lila spotted Zixer standing near a fountain. His tentacles curled gently around the glowing orb he often carried. "Professor," she called out, approaching him cautiously. Zixer turned to face her, his multifaceted eyes gleaming softly. "Miss Carter," he said, his melodic voice carrying a note of pride. "Today marks the beginning of your journey. What will you do next?" Lila hesitated, considering the question. In truth, she didn't have a concrete plan yet, but she knew one thing for certain. She wanted to make a difference. "I'm going to keep learning," she said finally. "And I want to share what I've learned, with others, with the galaxy. Maybe even teach someday like you." Zixer's glow brightened momentarily, a silent acknowledgement of her answer. "Teaching is not just about imparting knowledge," he reminded her. "It is about inspiring change, about showing others that empathy and intellect can coexist, that understanding leads to harmony." "I'll remember that," Lila promised, her voice firm. Before leaving, Zixer handed her the orb once more. "Keep this close," he advised. "Let it guide you when the path seems uncertain." With those parting words, he turned and glided away, disappearing into the crowd. Lila watched him go, feeling a mix of gratitude and determination. Though their time together had ended, his influence would stay with her forever. Later that evening, as fireworks lit up the night sky over New Geneva, Lila found herself standing alone on a balcony overlooking the city. The glowing orb rested in her hands, its pulsing rhythm matching the beat of her heart. Below, the streets teemed with life, beings celebrating, connecting, and dreaming of futures yet unwritten. Cale joined her shortly, his presence comforting. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the distant cheers. "The future," Lila replied, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Ours, theirs, everyone's. It feels overwhelming sometimes, but also exciting. Like we're part of something bigger than ourselves." Cale nodded silently, his shimmering form reflecting the lights of the city. Together, they stood there, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, among the infinite possibilities of the cosmos, lay answers to questions they hadn't even thought to ask. And Leela knew, without a doubt, that she was ready to seek them. The days following graduation passed in a blur of farewells and preparations. Lila spent her time packing up her dorm room, saying goodbye to friends, and attending celebratory gatherings that seemed endless. Yet, amidst the whirlwind of activity, she couldn't shake the sense of anticipation building within her. This wasn't just the end of one chapter, it was the start of another. The glowing orb Zixer had entrusted to her remained a constant companion, its steady pulse serving as both a reminder of her journey so far and a beacon guiding her toward what lay ahead. On her final day at Galaxia Academy, Leela took a quiet walk through the campus grounds. The botanical gardens were alive with vibrant colors, their alien plants swaying gently in response to unseen rhythms. She paused near the fountain where she'd last spoken with Zixer, running her fingers over its cool surface. Though he was no longer there, his presence lingered, a quiet assurance that she was ready for whatever came next. As she stood there, lost in thought, Kale approached silently, his translucent form shimmering faintly in the sunlight. "It's almost time," he said softly, breaking the silence. "I know," Layla replied, turning to face him. "I'm excited, but also nervous. What if I can't live up to everything I've promised myself?" Kale tilted his head thoughtfully. "You've already proven you're capable of more than you think. Remember how far you've come. Trust yourself." His words reassured her, but they also reminded her of something else. She wasn't alone. Whether it was Zixer's guidance or Kale's friendship, she had been supported every step of the way. And now, as she prepared to leave Earth behind, she carried those connections with her, woven into the fabric of who she had become. The departure terminal at New Geneva Spaceport buzzed with energy as travelers from across the galaxy boarded ships bound for distant stars. Leela arrived early, clutching her bag tightly while the glowing orb rested securely in an inner pocket. Around her, beings of all kinds bustled about, some embarking on adventures, others returning home after long journeys. The air hummed with excitement, tinged with the bittersweetness of goodbyes. Her destination awaited aboard the Stellar Horizon, a state-of-the-art research vessel tasked with exploring uncharted regions of the galaxy. Its mission was ambitious: to map new star systems, study emerging ecosystems, and foster interstellar diplomacy. For Leela, it represented not just an opportunity to contribute, but also a chance to continue learning, to deepen her understanding of the universe and her place within it. As she cooed for boarding, she spotted Cal nearby, accompanied by several other water-based students preparing for their own assignments. He waved when he saw her, his shimmering body catching the light. "Safe travels," he called out, his voice warm despite the noise around them. "You too," Lila replied, smiling. "We'll meet again someday, I'm sure of it." With a final nod, Kale turned and disappeared into the crowd. Watching him go, Leela felt a pang of sadness but also gratitude. Their partnership had taught her the value of collaboration, of finding strength in differences. She knew she would carry that lesson with her wherever she went. Boarding the Stellar Horizon felt like stepping into a dream. The ship's interior gleamed with polished metal and glowing panels, its corridors alive with the hum of advanced technology. Crew members moved efficiently, greeting newcomers and ensuring everyone settled in comfortably. Leela found her quarters quickly, a small but cozy cabin with a viewport offering a stunning view of the stars outside. After stowing her belongings, she joined the rest of the crew in the observation lounge for a pre-departure briefing. Captain Renara, a tall humanoid with iridescent scales, addressed the group confidently. "Welcome aboard the Stellar Horizon," she began, her voice resonating through the room. "Our mission is one of discovery and diplomacy. Each of you brings unique skills and perspectives that will be vital to our success. Together, we will push boundaries and forge connections across the stars." Leela listened intently, her heart swelling with pride. This was it, the moment she had worked so hard for. As the briefing concluded, she stepped onto the observation deck, gazing out at Earth below. The planet looked breathtakingly beautiful from orbit, its blue-green hues swirling against the blackness of space. It was a reminder of where she had started, and how much farther she had yet to go. Hours later, the ship's engines roared to life, propelling them beyond Earth's atmosphere and into the vast expanse of the cosmos. Layla watched in awe as the stars stretched into streaks of light, signaling their entry into faster-than-light travel. She felt a strange mix of exhilaration and humility, knowing she was part of something greater than herself. In the weeks that followed, Layla threw herself into her work. Her role involved analyzing data collected from newly discovered planets, identifying potential resources, and assessing environmental impacts. But more importantly, she served as a bridge between species, helping translate languages, mediate conflicts, and foster mutual understanding. It was challenging, exhausting even, but deeply fulfilling. One evening, during a rare moment of downtime, Layla sat alone in the observation lounge, holding the glowing orb in her hands. Its rhythm matched the gentle hum of the ship, creating a soothing harmony. She thought back to Sixer's lessons, realizing how much they had shaped her approach to every challenge she faced. Empathy wasn't just a tool, it was a mindset, a way of seeing the universe as interconnected and alive. As she gazed out at the infinite sea of stars, she felt a profound sense of purpose. The galaxy was vast and full of mysteries, yes, but it was also fragile, requiring care and compassion to thrive. And though she was only one person, she believed she could make a difference, one connection at a time.